Many people, many abductees and experiencers talk about being able to leave their body on a craft, their physical human body stands still, and an ET walks out of it and goes and does healing or whatever work on a craft at night. And that is what I have experienced also. Okay, so just quickly now, because we're getting on a bit, I'm going to very briefly describe how this whole training thing with these kids starts, because I'm going to move on in a minute to talk about what I call the 3 waves and the agendas. So this is a bird's eye view my husband's done of what I described to him, where children were taken into this room. A whole lot of mothers and their children were taken on board craft. We were all taken to a very large room where there were big white tables. Then about 30 greys came in with bundles of little ET babies, and they were put on tables, spread around. And then they watched those very early interactions. My son was 2 months old. They watched the interactions taking place between those children, how they would recognise each other, and the greys seemed to be able to pick up interactions taking place. So the monitoring of the interspecies connections is being done very carefully right from birth with children my son's age who may eventually be a part of a massive disclosure or the presence of ETs on force on our planet. I don't know. It depends on how much we evolve in the interim. And one grey in particular was leaning over my son. He was transfixed, communicating with him. I felt a bit put out by that because he was my son, but I wasn't picking anything up from him. But the grey seemed to be interacting with him quite happily. Okay, so what is this dual soul that I talk about? Okay, so it's a blending prior to incarnation of your soul spark that you've brought with you to this life combined with a grey consciousness. And it is only souls who have agreed to do this particular interim step of the reincarnation process. To explain it further, we need to first look at the intergenerational factor, which many of you will be familiar with. The first generation of study, my grandmother's age, she used to see balls of light in her room that spoke to her. She was very psychic. She used to be involved in early spiritualist healing in groups in Auckland. So there was that capacity for that psychic ability. Second generation, in my case, would be my mother, who's an intuitive artist and has been for years. Again, that same psychic thing coming through. Third generation is me. So at this point, once they've identified this genetic line that they want to follow, there's probably interventions that happen because I've been told that I've had my genes altered in some way, as has my son. And so my third generation has this 3-fold education on the craft I've talked about, the soul state, the human state, and the grey consciousness. And one of our tasks, not only doing certain things for ourselves, is to support that next generation because they're the ones who are going to make so many changes on this planet. So the fourth generation, that's my son's, has many vast education on the craft, but some of them recall it, some of them don't, and I'll cover that shortly. And these ones are going to be the ones who are parents of hybrid children, but not hybrid children on the planet as many other people are speaking about in the contact field worldwide. We're talking about the hybrid children on the craft, and I'm not talking about the ones that many people talk about that they've been seeing for years. I'm talking about the new echelon that they're producing, which I'm talking about in my next book. Okay, so there you are. The dual soul is the individual soul source, or the knowledge you've acquired over many thousands of lives, and you take a piece of that and it's combined with the grey intelligence, identity or consciousness, and it creates what they call the enhanced human psyche. And as I said, some people describe being able to rise out of their body at night as a grey, or move out of their body on the craft as a grey to do healing work or whatever. And at the age of 12, that happened to me. 5 minutes? Okay. On other occasions, I have seen this dual soul capacity with other species. I have been told that this is the first time The ETs have done it with humans mixed with an ET, but I have seen, in this case, there was a mantis, and he was doing some healing, and he said to me he was going to show me the other dual aspect of him, which was a grey, and I could see him morphing physically from one to the other as he was doing healing work, and he was showing me how he was accessing this species for that and this species for that, and he was just morphing backwards and forwards, able to glide between those two consciousness and those two working abilities. Okay, some people talk about terminologies here. I talk about the dual soul, dual identity. A friend of mine, Joe Nyman, talks about dual reference. Some people talk about having a past life as an ET, and I think many people have brought memories of those lives in. It doesn't mean you're an ET in this life, it means that you've led a past life and you've brought some memory from that past life. Then there are people who talk about genetic alterations, or that they're a hybrid, or a combination of some of those above. Joe Nyman is 83. I'm going to be meeting with him next week in LA. He's flying over from Georgia to discuss with me his research on what he calls duality, which he discovered in the 1990s. It's somewhat different from mine, but once again we're going to find that common ground, and we hope to be able to do a speech together on it at some stage. I'm just going to miss that out because it's just statements about it. So the three waves. Positive agenda for human advancement, the key words being change from within. So the ETs are not here to save us, they are here to help engender change in us. We have to do the work. We have to change ourselves from within. They're not going to save us. They've probably gathered everything they need to gather off our planet to recreate that life should we make a mess of it. But they may not recreate it here, they may recreate it elsewhere. Now, a researcher has written a book about the three waves, the volunteer souls to planet Earth. I have actually been accused of plagiarising her work, so I always put this up in my speeches to show that perhaps the reverse is in case, because I presented this material in 2007 in Sydney, and that researcher was given a copy of my DVD shortly after that. Okay, so the three waves of volunteer souls, as I know it. The first wave started, believe it or not, back in the late 1800s with what I call the innovators. So this chart here is based on information that I have been given by the Greys, which I've put into my terminology in order to be able to speak about it adequately. So the first wave had innovators come in very early on because, let's face it, these ETs can see far into our future. They can see where we're going and what we're doing. And so they decided at that time, in conjunction with working with our spiritual hierarchy of our planet, that things needed to be done in order to save us from ourselves, but also in order for us to join a greater cosmic hierarchy. And Michio Kaku, the theoretical physicist, he talks in many of his speeches about how we are still a planetary species. We haven't yet become interplanetary, and then it goes intergalactic and way beyond that in his categories. So we're at the kindergarten stage, and yet we're already making a horrible mess of it. So hence our spiritual hierarchy has sought help from a lot of ET groups coming in to assist in their particular areas of skill. So these innovators were people who were incarnating in these programs, bringing forward some new ideas in healing, new ideas in psychic stuff, because remember that the church has put the clampers on a lot of psychic stuff over the years. So this was being reintroduced by these early souls coming in, but also bringing in new technology and new ideas that leading into our technological boom. But at the other end of that scale of the first wave, and I call it the first wave, but actually the second part of it has incarnated way further on. But they belong to that same wave because they're performing the same sort of task. So the enlighteners, I call, are people coming into the planet who've had a life as an ET somewhere else who are bringing in many of those skills. Some people may call them star kids or indigo kids. I prefer not to use those terms because I think that, having been in this for 43 years, I see that we've moved well away from the original meaning and definitions of those words, and it's now almost anything goes to be a star kid. It's moved well away from what it used to be. So those terms, in my understanding, have become almost obsolete and meaningless. So these enlighteners are people who've had past lives, who somewhere else they're bringing in some of those skills, and they're quite happy to display them quite overtly. They don't care whether anyone is offended by it or threatened by it or not. They're just natural, they just do it. A lot of the unusual things that you see people doing in the psychic realm, that's them, they don't care. But they are showing us what humans are capable of. They are keying into people's minds, oh, I wish I could do that. You know, they are giving potential and possibilities, reality to those skills. The second wave is the wave that I'm in, and that's broken into two groups. Once again, one that incarnated a bit earlier, and I find that many of the abductees are in the pioneer group. Many abductees who came out early with their experiences were shunned, were ridiculed, etc. So they went through a hard time. But they also instigated the first research being done on it worldwide. And some people are critical of those early researchers, but hey, they did their best because there's no textbooks on this. And what they were being confronted with was largely negative, frightening experiences because we had no experience with interacting with species in this era. And the second part of that wave is the communicators. Some of those have a dual soul. I see myself as being in that communicator one, more the experiencers, more people who are making movies, writing books, doing interviews, all of that kind of thing, or who have not yet remembered their experiences and may do those things in the future. In the third wave, we've got the implementers group, a group of young people who, around the 50s, 60s, 70s, who were implementing all sorts of new skills, new technology, taking us into this technological realm again, extending it, and what I call a fourth intellect, which is the group my son is in, and that is they have had they've had the education as a soul, as a human, as a grey, three areas which they have to assimilate, put together to create that fourth intellect, which is a perfectly integrated version of all of those things. So that's a little bit complex, but there's a pictorial one I did of it in 2006. You can see that the first wave are still incarnating. The green line goes on and on and on, coming into the planet to help in the future times, whatever may happen. The second wave looks as if it's smaller, but it's not. It's absolutely dense with people who are going to come forward, generally in my age group, a little bit younger, older, who are going to come forward over the next 5 to 10 years, I believe, in a deluge. And it will be a deluge that will be undeniable. So that group's very dense with people. And then the third wave who are going to take us into the future. They're going to make changes from within. They're going to get into positions of power and authority in a positive, constructive sense. And they're going to finally make some of those massive changes. And that will be needed because the technology that we're working towards now is consciousness technology. They are trained in this kind of thing on the craft, and they're going to lead the way. I'm going to miss that one out. That was for another speech I did down in the States. Okay, so getting to the end now. We're living in a time of global chaos and dramatic climate change. We all know that. And I had 4 what I consider quite important things told to me in those years. And they were told at an undersea base, an underground base, and on a craft. 1980, 87, 88 and 89. So I'll quickly run through those. A large group of people. I was amongst around 250 people in an undersea base. There was a grey and a human up the front. Many times I see these humans in navy-coloured overalls, no insignia. They're not military. They are humans working in some kind of capacity with the species to implement this agenda and these 3 waves. and they're non-threatening, never had any problem with them on the craft, and some of them are scientists. So we have this raft of human beings who have been working for some time. I'm not talking about a negative group. I'm not talking about a military-industrial. I'm talking about humans who want to see this interaction with other species work. But on one occasion, I've just picked out a statement that the Grey made. He stated that in the future there will be wild speculation, enthrallment, blame, fear, and a multitude of theories pertaining to the idea of contact with extraterrestrials. Watch out for cults. Watch out for big followings. I was talking to Jason earlier on. Watch out for people pinching material. I've had that happen with 5 people in the last 2 years since my book came out. Big pieces of my book being transferred instantly to their experiences when before they never ever talked about it. So we have people who are, as several speakers have said this morning, who are getting the conference invites and conveying material in certain ways. Experiencers and abductees have been trained by the ETs to express things in a certain way, to express their material in a certain way, and to help to unlock things in other people's minds. You take that material and if someone else takes it and calls it their own, it becomes something else. And this has got to stop in the UFO field. I'm a great advocate for integrity in the field. I'm sick and tired of the posers and people pinching material. It's going on all the time. It really has to stop if we are going to make headway and be credible to the public. So I'm saying one of these things, Jason probably would go, shh. But I feel very strongly about it. Because we need to make a paper trail. We need to know who said what, who's described what, so that in the future, when the general public, way outside of our field, when they want to examine it in what the ETs call the great time of examination that's going to take place, they want to know who said what. They want to be able to see, oh, this person gave a speech and they've referenced this person in their book, so I'll go and I'll find that book. But if you're just pinching material wholesale and making it your own and not referencing it, how's anybody going to make any sense of anything, let alone those in the field, outside of the field? This really came across to me in 2015 when I was speaking in Europe and the UK, at Gary's conference actually, and I was going down through Italy with my husband as the refugees and immigrants were coming up. But way back in 1987, Gray said there will be this is a cut down version of it, there'll be widespread chaos and there'll be a dead stage on the planet. The human psyche will experience global despondency and people will be at a loss to know where to go, even physically or geographically, or where to turn for assistance and guidance. And I am seeing that now. People who are displaced, homeless, immigrants, nowhere to go, no guidance, no future. And that dead stage is not, that he described, it's not where everything's going to die, it's where we will hit the bottom. And on one occasion, I was with a group of people on a craft. Same thing, about 250 people in an auditorium. I describe it in my book, being shown images of future earth changes that were so horrific. We have had a lot of tragedies in our country with earthquakes and volcanoes, but I haven't seen anything like that happen worldwide yet. And I'm not being a scaremonger, but I am being real, and I'm saying to you that these things are in the books, and we can change the intensity, if we like to look at the Gaia theory, of the Earth having its own consciousness and energy field. We can change the intensity of those Earth changes. The more we evolve, the more we become aware, and hey, the better people we become. It's that simple. Leading a better life in every way. And we can lessen that, but they are coming, I'm sorry to say. On one occasion, the Grey said he proposed that in the future there will be much confusion and speculation as the realisation emerges with the general public that extraterrestrial races are actually here. Because in our own field, we can become quite insular, thinking that we know everything about the UFO field, and therefore You know, we think we're ready for anything. But we're only a tiny drop in the bucket of the total world population. And it's that total world population, that total consciousness that has to raise up. So we actually, instead of sitting on our laurels, we have a lot of work to do. And finally, I was told that these humans that I see sometimes on craft in navy overalls, sometimes in fawn jumpsuits, they are like a police force, but they are not a police force. By that description, I'm meaning that they have a structure, they have a purpose. I understand that they are trained and integrated right across societies worldwide, and they form a societal framework upon which contact can eventually rest. So my understanding is that many of these humans in overalls I've seen on the craft learning the technologies, who can very adeptly talk telepathically. Let's pass through that because that's not that important. Okay, so we're in a time of waking the sleepers. Waking the sleepers. Talking to people within the field. There are people who are going to be triggered. Their experiences will start to come out. They'll be looking for someone to talk to. Are we ready to talk to them sensibly and not divisively? And this is Joe Nyman again. He feels that things are changing. Now is the time to talk to the public about this idea of duality. And the latent and slumbering experiences are to be shocked or woken up because the need is here. I believe that disclosure is a precarious process fraught with hazards. And we, as people in the UFO field, need to create firm foundations to broaden public understanding of UFOs, contacts and subjects. And we have to have integrity in doing that. Kim Carlsberg said, perhaps people of contact have indeed inherited knowledge of great importance that can only be extracted at precisely the right timing. Given all the variables of a changing world, the determination of that timing may need to be realised instinctively rather than by a designated date. So here is my issue that I always talk about of timing. It will happen when it's meant to be, but we have the work to do in the meantime. Sherry Wilde says the alien abduction topic is one filled with lots of speculation and conjecture by the UFO investigators. Most of the analysis has been done by those who've never even had a contact experience themselves and can only form opinions based on what they hear and observe from the actual participants. I'd like to commend Joanne and her committee. On many conference schedules, I'm the afterthought because I'm an experiencer, and many of the researchers are up there talking about what I've experienced. Communicators are being activated quickly now worldwide. This is me talking in my book, and it will facilitate an unlocking process in people. How the communicators present their knowledge and experiences to the public will be crucial. And we're on to the last slide. Okay, this is an old African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. You want to get there, you want to be the first, you want to be the best, go fast, go by yourself. That's the quickest route. But what are you going to do when you get there? Because there's no one else there. But if you want to go far, go together. Because we have to go far in the UFO field. We have a very difficult task ahead of us in the future. Should disclosure take place, should the ETs turn up in force, land on the lawn, we have to go far before that happens. We have so much to cover, so much to develop. We need to get ourselves together and get ourselves organised. We need to start connecting, linking with integrity, with truth, and with purpose. And many of those things are lacking. So if we want to go far, we have to take everyone with us. Because if we're going to evolve as a civilization, as souls, as a planet, we have to go together. We can't leave big amounts of people behind. There's always going to be some left behind. We have to gather as many as we can. And we have to go slowly and surely, supporting each other together. Thank you.